absence of death is what haunts you most. Not the dying itself, you have no memory of that, but the gap where it should have been. You recall the truck's taillights blazing crimson through sheets of rain, the violent lurch of your steering wheel pulling left, the crystalline thought, calm as mathematics, that you were about to collide with the guardrail at 70 miles per hour. Then consciousness returns. But the space between, that instant when everything should have changed, gone, erased, as if someone edited it out of your existence, that missing moment, that's where your world split in two. Thursday, March 8th, 2013, began as unremarkably as any other workday morning. Daniel Carr departed his New Haven apartment at precisely 6:47 a.m., thermal coffee mug in one hand, laptop case draped over his shoulder. The coffee came from his usual corner bodega. 3 years of patronage had established this routine. The owner's son had a habit of drawing crude smiley faces on the cups with permanent marker. This particular morning's rain had caused the ink to run, transforming the cheerful expression into something vaguely disturbing. Daniel barely registered it. As an IT engineer for TechBridge Solutions, a mid-tier consulting firm, his morning mission was straightforward: deliver a replacement server component to their Stamford client before a catastrophic database failure. The part itself? Maybe $200. The downtime it would prevent? Tens of thousands. That's how these systems worked. Microscopic components holding together massive infrastructures. Daniel had triple-checked the server component, wrapping it meticulously in bubble wrap before securing it in a padded case in his trunk. Perhaps obsessive, but in his profession, a single damaged connector pin could mean hours of diagnostic hell. Interstate 95 South carried moderate traffic, typical for the pre-rush window. Years of experience had taught him that departing before 7 meant avoiding the worst congestion. The highway unspooled ahead, a concrete ribbon beneath an oppressive gray sky. The forecast had predicted light precipitation by 8 o'clock. For once, the meteorologists had called it correctly. Daniel merged onto the highway just as the first drops struck his windshield, tiny impacts that exploded into dark blooms on the glass. Within minutes, they devolved into a steady deluge. He activated NPR. A discussion about NASA budget cuts filled the cabin. Some debate over whether Mars missions justified funding while terrestrial problems persisted. Daniel made a mental note to review his 401k balance later. Market volatility always made him anxious about retirement accounts. The wipers established their hypnotic rhythm. Left, right. Left, right. His thoughts drifted to Sophie, wondering if she'd woken yet, if she'd noticed the weather, if she'd remembered to bring an umbrella to work. She never did. He made a mental note to text her. At 8:06 a.m., just beyond the Branford exit, the semi-truck 3 cars ahead lost traction. Daniel would dissect this moment endlessly afterward, attempting to capture every detail with forensic precision. How the truck's brake lights suddenly ignited, not the gentle tap-tap of normal highway driving, but a sustained, panicked blaze. How the trailer began drifting almost lazily at first, like a boat pivoting in calm water. Then faster. The rear axle swung wide, jackknifing across the wet pavement. Everything accelerated beyond thought. The silver Camry directly ahead swerved right onto the shoulder. The driver overcorrected. The Camry fishtailed, clipped the guardrail, spun into the center lane. Daniel's foot slammed the brake, but wet asphalt had transformed his tires into suggestions rather than tools. He felt the Honda Civic's anti-lock system pulse beneath his shoe. that rapid staccato judder signaling the computer's desperate attempt at salvation. But physics doesn't negotiate with computers. The car began rotating counterclockwise. Daniel's view became a carousel. Highway, trees, median, oncoming traffic, highway, trees. His hands gripped the steering wheel. Useless. The world spun. He glimpsed the median barrier approaching, concrete and unforgiving. Just enough time to think, this is going to hurt. Then headlights. A red pickup truck coming from his left. The driver's face frozen in shock behind the windshield. Too close. Impossibly close. Daniel attempted to turn the wheel, but his trajectory was already determined. The laws of motion had made their ruling. The sound of metal on metal, simultaneously sharp and dull, like a door slamming in a padded room. The airbag detonating into his chest, chemical propellant burning his throat, his head snapping forward, then back. Something in his neck made a sound he didn't want to remember. Then nothing. Not darkness, not pain, not even the cinematic fade to black. Just a surgical excision of perception. One moment, bracing for impact, knuckles white on the wheel, breath trapped in his throat. The next, staring at a white ceiling tile with a water stain resembling Idaho. The transition was so seamless it didn't feel like lost time. It felt like a film edit. Someone had taken scissors to his existence and removed a single frame. "Mr. Carr? Can you hear me?" Daniel blinked. The ceiling resolved into focus. The water stain genuinely resembled Idaho. He could distinguish the panhandle, the southern border. Strange how the brain seeks patterns when trying to orient itself, finding meaning in chaos. A woman in scrubs leaned into his field of vision, shining a penlight into his eyes. Kind eyes, exhausted but compassionate. The sort of eyes that had witnessed extensive trauma but hadn't surrendered hope in humanity yet. "You're at Yale New Haven Hospital," she said. Her voice carried professional calm with a slight Caribbean accent. "You were in a car accident. Do you know what day it is?" Daniel's mouth felt desiccated. His tongue adhered to his palate. His head throbbed. Not sharp pain, but a deep pulsing ache radiating from somewhere behind his eyes. "Thursday," he managed. His voice emerged like he'd been screaming. Had he been screaming? "Good. And your name?" "Daniel. Daniel Carr." "Excellent. You're doing great." She clicked off the penlight and made notations on a tablet, one of those hospital-grade devices engineered to survive nuclear events. "You've sustained a mild concussion and some bruising. But all things considered, you're incredibly fortunate. The accident could have been substantially worse." "How long have I been here?" "About 6 hours. You were unconscious when the paramedics transported you in, but your scans came back clean. No internal bleeding, no fractures. We're keeping you overnight for observation, but you should be able to go home tomorrow." 6 hours. Daniel attempted the calculation. If the accident occurred around 8:16 a.m., that meant it was now, what, 2 p.m.? Evening? He couldn't determine. The room had no windows, just fluorescent lights and the steady beep of a heart monitor somewhere to his left. Daniel attempted to sit up. Pain lanced through his ribs, sharp and immediate, like someone had inserted a heated blade between the bones. He gasped and collapsed back. "Take it easy," the nurse said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Gentle but firm. "Your body's been through significant trauma. The airbag probably cracked a rib or two. Nothing serious, but it's going to hurt for a while. Just rest. I'll check on you in an hour." She departed, her footsteps squeaking on the linoleum, that particular sound hospitals make, rubber soles on waxed floors. Daniel had always hated it. He stared at the ceiling. The water stain genuinely resembled Idaho. He wondered if anyone else had noticed. He wondered if Sophie knew he was here. He should call her. Where was his phone? Daniel turned his head slowly, carefully, mindful of the pain in his ribs, and spotted his belongings on a side table. Wallet, keys, phone. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb fracture across the top right corner, but it still illuminated when he pressed the button. Daniel's hand began trembling. The phone quivered in his grip. He set it down on the bed beside him, closed his eyes, and breathed. Concussion, he reminded himself. The nurse had confirmed a concussion. Head trauma causes confusion, memory problems. He'd read about this once, something called confabulation, where the brain fills gaps with fabricated details. It happens to people constantly after accidents. The brain attempts to construct coherence from incomplete information. It creates narratives, builds bridges across missing time. Maybe he was mixing up memories. Maybe the crash had scrambled something in his temporal lobe. Maybe Sophie's face had gotten confused with someone else's. These things happen, except the photos looked too authentic, too consistent, too detailed. Daniel picked up the phone again, opened Facebook, searched for Sophie Marsh. No results found. He stared at the screen, typed her name again carefully, ensuring he hadn't misspelled anything. No results found. He tried Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Nothing. Sophie Marsh didn't exist. Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. Not panic. Not yet. Just a creeping sense of wrongness. Like when you wake in a hotel room and forget where you are for a few seconds. That moment of profound disorientation. He returned to his contacts, found their mutual friends, people they'd met through her work, through his gym, through random parties and dinner invitations. He clicked through to their Facebook profiles. Every single one of them was friends with Claire Adams, the brunette woman from his photos. His girlfriend, according to every piece of digital evidence in his possession. The woman he had absolutely no memory of. Daniel was discharged the following afternoon. The discharge process consumed forever. Paperwork, insurance verification, a final examination from a physician who appeared approximately 12 years old and spoke rapidly about concussion protocols and warning signs to monitor. Daniel nodded through all of it, signed where instructed, accepted the pamphlet about traumatic brain injury symptoms. A taxi deposited him at his apartment building on Whitney Avenue, a 3-story walk-up with ivy crawling up the brick facade. The building dated to the 1920s and retained some original architectural details. Decorative cornices, arched windows, a heavy oak door with beveled glass panels. Daniel had always appreciated it. It felt substantial, permanent. Everything appeared normal as he approached. The same chipped paint on the front door, a spot near the handle where someone had scratched through to the bare wood underneath. The same row of mailboxes in the lobby, most dented from years of rough handling. The same faint aroma of Indian cooking from the second-floor unit, cumin and turmeric and something else he could never quite identify. He collected his mail, mostly junk, a few bills, and climbed the stairs to 3B. Each step made his ribs ache. The doctor had prescribed pain medication, but Daniel hadn't filled it yet. He disliked the foggy feeling opioids produced. Better to endure the pain. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The living room was exactly as he'd left it. Same brown leather couch with the worn armrest. Same bookshelf crammed with technical manuals and dog-eared paperbacks. Same stack of wired magazines on the coffee table. Same framed poster of the Pillars of Creation. that famous Hubble image of star-forming gas clouds, everything in its place. Daniel set his keys in the bowl by the door, dropped his mail on the counter, walked into the kitchen to get water, and stopped. The window over the sink faced an alley. Daniel stared. The glass was cold under his fingertips. That wasn't right. That wasn't right at all. The window was supposed to overlook the courtyard. A small square of grass with a bench and a struggling cherry tree that bloomed pink every April. He'd eaten breakfast at that window 1,000 times, watching neighbors walk their dogs, watching kids cut through on their way to school. But now, when he looked out, he saw a narrow alley between his building and the next. Brick walls on both sides, dark and stained with water damage. A dumpster overflowing with black garbage bags. A fire escape zigzagging up the adjacent building, rusted and precarious looking. He stepped closer, pressed his palm against the glass. It was real, cold, slightly dirty on the outside with a smudge that might have been a handprint. This was his kitchen. He recognized everything else. The cabinets, the appliances, the crack in the linoleum by the refrigerator. But the window was wrong. "Hey, Milo," he called, turning away from the window. His voice sounded too loud in the empty apartment. "Come here, buddy." Silence. Daniel frowned. Milo was a border collie mix, 3 years old, high energy. The kind of dog that started bouncing the moment he heard keys in the door, tail wagging so hard his whole back end moved, ready for a walk or treats or just attention. He should have been at the entrance the moment Daniel walked in. Milo. Daniel walked through the apartment. Checked the bedroom. Bed unmade, same as always. Checked the bathroom. Towels on the floor. Also same as always. Looked under the couch, in the closet, behind the shower curtain. No dog. Daniel's chest tightened. He pulled out his phone and called his downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski. She was retired, home most of the time, and had dogs sat for him before when he had to work late. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" Her voice was warm, slightly breathless. She was probably on her stationary bike. She rode it every afternoon while watching courtroom shows. "Hi, Mrs. Kowalski. It's Daniel from 3B. I just got back from the hospital. And did you, by any chance, let Milo out yesterday or take him for a walk?" There was a pause. A long one. Daniel could hear the whir of the exercise bike in the background, then silence as she stopped pedaling. "I'm sorry, dear. Who's Milo?" "My dog. Border collie mix, black and white. You've watched him before." "Oh, Daniel, you don't have a dog. You have that lovely orange tabby, Atlas, isn't it? I see him in your window all the time." Daniel felt the floor tilt slightly under his feet. "I don't have a cat." "Of course you do. I just saw him this morning, actually. He was sitting on the windowsill watching the birds." "Mrs. Kowalski, I've had Milo for 3 years. You've met him. You gave him treats." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, the way people talk to someone they think might be confused. "Daniel, honey, are you feeling all right? Did the doctors say anything about your head?" He hung up. Daniel stood in the middle of his living room, phone in hand, trying to make sense of what was happening. Mrs. Kowalski had known Milo. She'd complained once about the barking when Daniel left him alone too long. She'd laughed when Milo tried to herd her poodle at the park. He searched the apartment again, more carefully this time. In the bedroom closet, behind a stack of sweaters he hadn't worn since last winter, he found a litter box. It was clean, but clearly used. Clumps of litter stuck to the bottom, the faint smell of ammonia in the enclosed space. On the kitchen counter beside the microwave, sat a bag of cat food. Purina, chicken flavor. The bag was half empty. Daniel sat down on the couch, put his head in his hands. His ribs screamed in protest, but he barely noticed. Concussion, he thought again. Brain injury. False memories. It happens. The brain is plastic, malleable. It can be tricked. It can trick itself. But then why did the window change? Why did his neighbor, who he'd known for 2 years, suddenly remember a completely different pet? Why did physical objects appear that had never existed before? Unless they had existed. Unless he was the one who was wrong. Daniel opened his laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing his desktop, a photo of the Andromeda Galaxy. He opened his email client and scrolled through the inbox. The most recent message was from his boss, Tom Brennan, dated yesterday morning, March 9th, according to the timestamp. Daniel, great work on the Thompson account. I know you were worried about the timeline, but you pulled it off. Let's discuss your promotion to senior engineer next week. We're finally getting the budget approved. Congrats. Daniel read the email 3 times. He hadn't been promoted. He was still a mid-level engineer. He'd been trying to move up for months, but the company kept saying they didn't have the budget. Tom had told him directly just 2 weeks ago. Maybe next quarter. He scrolled further back, found emails from February discussing project timelines. From January talking about performance reviews. From December outlining salary negotiations. All of it written as if he'd already been promoted. As if he'd been a senior engineer since January. The Thompson account. Daniel vaguely remembered it. A small manufacturing company that needed network infrastructure upgrades. But he'd never worked on it. That had been Jake's project. Except according to his sent folder, he'd been the lead. He'd written dozens of emails coordinating with the client. He'd filed status reports. He'd even traveled to their facility in Waterbury for an on-site consultation. Daniel had no memory of any of it. He closed the laptop. His hands were shaking again, trembling so violently he had to clench them into fists. He needed to talk to Sophie. She would know what was going on. She was the one person who always made sense when everything else felt like chaos. She had this way of cutting through complexity, finding the simple truth underneath. He grabbed his phone, dialed her number. The one he'd called 100 times, the one he knew by heart. You've reached the law offices of Brennan and Associates. If you know your party's extension. Daniel ended the call, stared at the screen. That was Sophie's number. He was absolutely certain. 2035550147. He'd memorized it the week after they started dating. He used to call her during lunch breaks just to hear her voice. But now, it was a law office. He tried texting. Sophie, it's Daniel. Please call me. Something's wrong. The message failed to deliver. Not a valid number. Daniel opened Facebook again, searched for their mutual friends one by one, clicked through their profiles, looked at their photos, read their posts. In every shot where Sophie should have been, at the beach, at concerts, at birthday dinners, the brunette woman appeared instead. Same events, same locations, same smiles. Sometimes in the exact same poses, like someone had done a find and replace operation on reality itself. And in every caption, she had a name. Claire Adams. Daniel clicked on her profile. It was public. He scrolled through her timeline. Relationship status. In a relationship with Daniel Carr. Her photos. Hundreds of them. Him and her. Dinners, hikes, movie nights, lazy Sunday mornings. A whole documented relationship spanning 2 years. 2 years he had absolutely no memory of. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open, cross-referencing everything he could find. Old credit card statements showing charges at restaurants he didn't remember visiting. Text message logs with conversations he'd never had. Social media posts documenting events he'd never attended. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Sophie Marsh had never existed. Claire Adams was his girlfriend. They'd been together for 2 years. They'd moved in together last fall. But he had no memory of her. By dawn, Daniel had compiled 2 folders on his desktop. One labeled Sophie, one labeled Claire. He dragged every photo, every document, every reference into the appropriate folder. The Sophie folder contained 47 items, photos mostly, snapshots he'd taken, screenshots of text conversations, a saved voicemail where she wished him happy birthday. All of it was there. All of it was real to him. The Claire folder contained 212 items, and it kept growing as he found more evidence of their relationship buried in his digital life. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his eyes. His ribs still ached from the accident, and his head felt like it was stuffed with cotton. He needed to think clearly, but every thought felt slippery, like trying to hold water in his hands. At 7:30 a.m., he showered, dressed in clean clothes, and drove to work. The drive was mechanical, muscle memory taking over while his mind spun in circles. He didn't remember making the turns, didn't remember parking. Suddenly, he was just there, sitting in his car in the Tech Bridge Solutions parking lot, staring at the building's glass front door. The office was the same as always, gray cubicles arranged in neat rows, humming fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally. The faint smell of burned coffee from the break room. His co-workers greeted him with the usual mix of nods and distracted waves. A few people asked if he was okay, mentioned they'd heard about the accident. He gave vague answers and headed to his desk. Daniel had been working in IT long enough to know that systems kept logs of everything. Every login, every file transfer, every timestamp. Computers were obsessive record keepers, documenting each microsecond of their operation with perfect fidelity. If something had changed, if reality itself had shifted somehow, the data would show it. He sat down at his desk, logged into the server using his credentials, and pulled up the master log files for March 8, 2013. The logs were dense, thousands of entries per minute, but Daniel knew how to parse them. He scrolled to the morning hours, found the timestamp for 8:17 a.m., and stopped. The log showed 2 entries for 8:17:43 a.m., same second, same millisecond. 2 identical timestamps, one directly after the other, both recording the same system check. Then another pair at 8:17:44 a.m., and another at 8:17:45 a.m. The pattern continued for exactly 60 seconds, ending at 8:18:43 a.m. After that, the log returned to normal. Single entries, sequential timestamps, everything as it should be. Daniel stared at the screen. That shouldn't be possible. Server logs didn't duplicate. The system's internal clock was synced to an atomic standard, specifically to the NIST time servers in Colorado. The margin of error was measured in nanoseconds. It couldn't repeat itself, unless the atomic clock itself had hiccuped. "Hey, Carr." Daniel looked up. His co-worker, Jake Simmons, leaned against the cubicle wall, coffee mug in hand. Jake was in his early 30s, perpetually cheerful, the kind of guy who decorated his desk with action figures and seemed to take nothing seriously. But he was good at his job. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I'm fine. Just, do you remember anything weird happening on March 8th? Like a power glitch or something? Jake frowned, thinking. March 8th? That was yesterday, right? Daniel's stomach clenched. Yeah, we had a brownout that morning. Real quick. Maybe half a second. UPS kicked in, so nothing crashed, but it tripped a couple alarms. Had to reset the backup system manually. Why? Did anyone check the logs? Nah, it was too short to matter. Probably just a surge from the grid. Happens sometimes when there's bad weather. Why? Are you seeing something weird in the data? Maybe. I'm not sure yet. Jake shrugged. Let me know if you need a hand. He wandered off toward the break room. Daniel turned back to his screen. A half-second power loss. A 60-second timestamp anomaly. The exact duration of the duplication in the logs. He pulled up the server's UPS logs, the backup power system that was supposed to keep everything running during outages. Found the entry for 8:17 a.m. on March 8th. The UPS had activated at exactly 8:17:43 a.m. The same moment the timestamp duplication began. But according to the system, the power loss had lasted only 0.5 seconds. The UPS had shut off at 8:17:43.5 a.m. So why did the timestamp duplication continue for a full minute? Daniel copied the logs onto a USB drive, grabbed his jacket, and left the office without telling anyone. He drove back to the crash site. The stretch of I-95 near Brantford looked unremarkable in daylight. 3 lanes of traffic flowing smoothly under a gray sky. No debris, no skid marks, no indication that anything had happened here 24 hours ago. Or 2 days ago, depending on which calendar you trusted. Daniel parked on the shoulder exactly where he thought he'd spun out. He could see the spot in his mind. The truck's taillights, the Camry fishtailing, his own car rotating. It should be right here. He got out and walked along the guardrail looking for damage. Bent metal, scratched paint, fragments of plastic from someone's bumper. Anything. Nothing. The guardrail was pristine. No dents, no scrapes, no signs of impact. The asphalt showed the usual wear. Cracks, patches, tire marks, but nothing fresh. Nothing that suggested a major accident. Daniel pulled out his phone and searched for local news reports. Typed, I-95 accident March 8th, Brantford. The first result was from the New Haven Register. Multi-vehicle accident snarls I-95 traffic. He clicked the article. March 9th, 2013. A jackknifed tractor-trailer caused major delays on Interstate 95 southbound near the Brantford exit Friday morning. The accident, which occurred around 8:15 a.m., involved at least 4 vehicles. Minor injuries were reported. State police are investigating the cause. March 9th, not March 8th. Friday, not Thursday. Daniel checked his phone's calendar app. It showed today's date as March 10th, 2013. Sunday. But he'd left for work on Thursday, March 8th. That was 2 days ago. He remembered it clearly. Waking up at 6:30, taking a shower, grabbing coffee from the bodega. Thursday. He scrolled through his recent calls, found an entry from March 7th. A call to his mother that he definitely remembered making. They'd talked about her garden, about whether she should plant tomatoes early this year or wait until April. That conversation was real. He remembered it. Then nothing until March 9th, when the hospital had contacted his emergency contact, his mother, to let her know he'd been in an accident. March 8th didn't exist in his phone's history. Daniel opened his text messages. The last message before the hospital was dated March 7th, a text to Sophie that now showed as undeliverable. The next message was March 9th, a text from his mother. Just got to the hospital. They say you're going to be fine. Call me when you wake up. He tried to think back to that day, March 8th, Thursday. He'd woken up early, driven to work, had the accident. Except now, every official record said the accident happened on March 9th, Friday. Had he lost a day? Or had March 8th never happened? Daniel sat down on the guardrail. The metal was cold and damp. Traffic rushed past, oblivious. He closed his eyes and tried to reconstruct his memories. Thursday, March 7th. Clear, real, solid. He'd worked late, ordered Chinese takeout, watched a documentary about black holes. Friday, March 8th. Clear, real, solid. He'd woken up early, driven to the client site, had the accident. Saturday, March 9th. According to the records, this was when the accident happened. But he had no memory of March 9th as a separate day. In his mind, March 8th flowed directly into the hospital, into waking up that evening. Unless March 8th had happened twice. Once for him, in one version of events, and once for everyone else in another. And somewhere between 8:17 and 8:18 a.m., those two versions had collided. Daniel needed answers. He needed someone who understood the kind of physics that could explain this. Someone who wouldn't immediately suggest therapy or medication. Someone who might actually believe him. He thought of Lena Varga. Lena was a physicist he'd met at a technology conference 3 years ago. She'd been presenting on quantum computing applications, and Daniel had been in the audience, fascinated by her description of superposition states and entanglement. They'd gotten coffee afterward, talked for hours about consciousness and computation, about whether the universe was deterministic or probabilistic. They'd stayed in touch, exchanging occasional emails about new papers and bad sci-fi movies that got the science hilariously wrong. If anyone could make sense of this, it was Lena. Daniel drove to Cambridge, Massachusetts. It took 2 hours, and he spent most of it rehearsing what he'd say. How do you tell someone, even a quantum physicist, that you think you've split across parallel timelines? He found visitor parking near the MIT Physics Building and texted Lena. "In town. Need to talk. It's urgent." She replied within minutes. Lab 4B. Doors open. Lena's lab was a cluttered space on the second floor, filled with optical tables covered in mirrors and beam splitters, laser equipment with warning labels in 3 languages, and whiteboards covered in equations Daniel only half understood. The smell of coffee and ozone hung in the air. Lena looked up from a computer screen as Daniel walked in. She was in her early 40s with sharp eyes behind black-rimmed glasses and dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She wore jeans and a faded MIT sweatshirt. "Daniel," she said, standing, "you look terrible. I was in a car accident. Jesus, are you okay?" "Physically, yeah. But something's wrong. Something's really wrong, and I don't know how to explain it without sounding insane." Lena gestured to a chair. "Try me. I work with particles that exist in multiple states simultaneously. My threshold for insane is pretty high." Daniel sat, took a breath, and told her everything. The accident on what he remembered as March 8th, waking up in a hospital. The photos on his phone showing a woman he didn't know. Sophie's disappearance from every database. The apartment window that now faced an alley. The dog that had become a cat. The promotion he'd never received. The duplicate timestamps in the server logs. The news reports that placed the accident a day later than he remembered. Lena listened without interrupting. She had this ability to focus completely on what someone was saying, to give them her full attention. Daniel had always appreciated that about her. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. Unlocked it. Daniel noticed she used 2 separate keys and pulled out a folder. set it on the desk between them. The label read, Observer Synchronization Failures in Quantum Event Simulations. "This is a paper I worked on 5 years ago," Lena said quietly. "It never got published." The reviewers thought it was too speculative, but the basic premise is this: reality isn't a single fixed thing. It's a continuous process of observation and correction. Every conscious observer, every person, every brain is constantly collapsing wave functions, turning probabilities into certainties. "Okay," Daniel said. "I've heard of that. The observer effect, right? But here's the part most people don't think about. What happens when an observer stops observing? When consciousness is interrupted by sleep, by coma, by death?" Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. "In our simulations," Lena continued, "we found that when an observer is removed from a system, the system doesn't just pause. It continues to evolve probabilistically. And when the observer returns, when they wake up or regain consciousness, the system has to resync. It has to choose one version of reality that's consistent with the observer's memory." "But what if it chooses wrong?" Lena nodded. "What if the version it chooses doesn't quite match? What if the observer's consciousness reconnects to a timeline that's close, but not identical? A timeline where they survived, but at the cost of small inconsistencies?" Daniel stared at the folder. "You're saying I died in that accident?" "I'm saying your consciousness was interrupted. Severely. And when it reconnected, it didn't land back in the exact same timeline. It landed in the nearest coherent version. One where you survived, but where certain details diverged. That's insane. Is it?" Lena opened the folder, pulled out a printout. 3 days ago, the Atomic Clock Network registered a synchronization error in the northeastern United States. It lasted exactly 1 second. The clocks corrected themselves immediately, but for that 1 second, every timestamp in the region was duplicated. She slid the printout across the desk. Daniel looked at the data, saw the spike at 8:17 a.m. on March 8th, or March 9th, depending on which timeline you believed. "That's not a coincidence," Lena said. "That's a correction event, the universe stitching itself back together." Daniel's hands were shaking again. "So what does that mean for me?" Lena hesitated. "It means you're living in a superposition. 2 versions of you. One who died, one who survived, collapsed into a single timeline. But the collapse isn't stable. You're the interference pattern. And eventually, one of you will have to fully resolve. What happens then?" "I don't know." Over the next week, the inconsistencies grew worse. Daniel started hearing songs on the radio that didn't exist. Tracks by bands he knew, with lyrics he recognized. But when he searched for them online, there was no record. He saw street signs flicker, Whitney Avenue becoming Whitley Avenue for half a second before snapping back. His reflection in mirrors began to lag, blinking a fraction of a second after he did. He recorded it once, using his phone's camera pointed at a bathroom mirror. Played the video back frame by frame. In 3 separate frames, his reflection blinked while his actual eyes stayed open. Daniel stopped sleeping. He couldn't trust what he'd wake up to. He spent his nights researching. Found forums full of people experiencing similar phenomena. Minor glitches in memory, inconsistencies in shared history. The Mandela effect, they called it. False memories that entire groups of people shared. But no one had an explanation. No one had proof. Except Daniel did. He had the server logs, the atomic clock data, the photos that existed in two versions. He had evidence that reality had forked. On March 15th, Daniel returned to the hospital, Yale New Haven Hospital. He wanted to find the nurse who treated him, ask her about the wing he'd been in, confirm that it had been real. But when he arrived, the receptionist looked confused. "Yale Meridian," she said. "This is Yale New Haven Hospital. We don't have a Meridian network." "But I was here," Daniel insisted. "Last week, 3rd floor, East Wing." The receptionist checked her computer. "Sir, our East Wing has been closed for renovation since 2009. It's not safe for patients." Daniel pushed past her, took the stairs to the 3rd floor, found the East Wing. The door was locked. A sign read, "Authorized personnel only." He tried the handle anyway. It opened. The hallway beyond was dark. Dusty sheets covered old equipment. The ceiling tiles sagged in places, stained with water damage. Daniel walked slowly down the corridor, his footsteps echoing. He reached the room where he'd woken up, the room with the Idaho-shaped water stain. The door was ajar. He pushed it open. The room was empty. No bed, no monitors, just bare walls and a single window overlooking the parking lot. And on the floor, near the corner, a hospital ID badge. Daniel picked it up. The photo showed his face. His name, Daniel Carr. His employee designation, patient. And the date of death, March 8th, 2013. Daniel didn't leave the hospital right away. He sat in the empty room, holding the badge, trying to process what it meant. He was dead, or he wasn't, or he was both. He thought about Sophie, wondered where she was in whatever version of reality she existed, wondered if she remembered him, if she was looking for him the same way he was looking for her. He thought about Claire, the woman whose face filled his photo gallery, whose life was intertwined with his in 1,000 documented ways. She deserved better than a boyfriend who couldn't remember her. Daniel pulled out his phone, opened the contacts, stared at Claire's name for a long time. Then he called Lena. "I found something," he said. "What?" "Proof. Proof that I died." Lena was silent for a moment. "Where are you?" "The hospital. The closed wing. Stay there. I'm coming." She arrived 30 minutes later, carrying a laptop and a handheld device that looked like a cross between a metal detector and a Geiger counter. "This measures quantum decoherence," Lena explained. "If your timeline is still unstable, this should pick it up." She turned it on. The device hummed. A needle on a small dial twitched. Lena walked around the room, holding the device at different angles. The needle jumped higher near Daniel, spiked when she aimed it directly at him. "You're emitting a massive decoherence signature," she said quietly. "Your quantum state is still unresolved." "What does that mean?" "It means the universe hasn't decided which version of you is real yet." She checked her laptop. "And there's another correction event coming." "When?" 72 hours. Same location, same coordinates as the original accident site. What happens if I'm there?" "I don't know. But if I had to guess, one timeline wins. One version of Daniel becomes the only version, and the other ceases to exist retroactively, like it never happened." Daniel looked down at the ID badge in his hand. "So, I either become the man who survived, or the man who died." "Yes." "Do I get to choose?" "I don't think so." Daniel spent the next 3 days saying goodbye. He didn't tell anyone what was happening. How could he? But he visited people, his mother, his co-workers, the neighbors who'd known him for years. He thanked them vaguely for being part of his life. He also tried to call Claire. She answered on the second ring. Daniel, where have you been? I've been texting you all week. I know, I'm sorry. I've just needed some space. Is everything okay? He almost told her. Almost explained that he didn't know her. That his entire memory of their relationship had been erased by a cosmic glitch. But what would that accomplish? If this timeline won, if he became the Daniel who had always known Claire, then this conversation wouldn't matter. And if the other timeline won, she'd never remember him anyway. Everything's fine, he said. I just wanted to hear your voice. There was a pause. You're scaring me. Don't be scared. I'll see you soon. He hung up. That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Sophie. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if you exist anymore, or if you ever did. But if some part of you is out there, in another timeline, in another version of this world, I want you to know that I remember you. I remember the way you laughed at bad jokes, the way you'd fall asleep on my shoulder during movies, the way you made everything make sense. I don't know what happens next, but if I disappear, if this version of me stops existing, I hope you're happy. I hope you found someone better. I love you. The second was to Claire. I'm sorry I've been distant. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like you weren't enough. The truth is, I've been lost. Not just physically, but in every way that matters. And I don't know if I'll find my way back. But if I do, if I wake up tomorrow and I'm still here, still the man you know, I promise I'll try to be better. I'll try to deserve you. Thank you for being patient with me. He folded both letters, put them in envelopes, and left them on the table. Then he drove to the crash site. It was 8:15 a.m. on March 18th, 2013. Daniel parked on the shoulder of I-95, near the exact spot where the truck had jackknifed 10 days ago. Or 1 day ago, depending on which calendar you trusted. The morning was gray and cold. Traffic rushed past oblivious. Lena had texted him an hour ago. Decoherence event detected. Probability spike at 8:17:43 a.m. Be careful. Daniel checked his phone. 8:16 a.m. He thought about getting back in the car, driving away. Maybe if he wasn't here when the correction happened, the universe would leave him alone. Let him stay fractured. Let him exist in the cracks between timelines. But he knew that wasn't how it worked. This was always going to happen. At 8:17 a.m., the air around him seemed to thicken. The sound of traffic became muffled, distant. Daniel's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Incoming call. Sophie Marsh. His heart stopped. He answered. Hello? 2 voices spoke at once, his and hers overlapping, phasing in and out of sync. Daniel? Sophie's voice, clear and real. Sophie, where are you? Claire's voice, layered underneath. I've been calling you all morning. I don't know, Daniel said. I don't know where I am. You're at the crash site, both women said, perfectly synchronized. Come home. The phone screen glitched, flickered between 2 contact photos. Sophie at the beach, Claire at the same beach. Then the screen went black. The world tilted. Daniel felt himself falling, not physically, but through something. Through layers of reality, each one slightly different from the last. In one, he was married to Sophie. In another, he'd never met her. In a third, he died in the crash, and none of this had ever happened. He saw all of it at once, every version, every possibility, and then silence.